Welcome back to What's the Juice podcast. Today's episode is with Zach Bush, and this conversation was so beautiful. If you guys know him, you know that he always takes it to the spiritual and the soil, and that is right up my alley. I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with today's guest, but if you're not, Zach Bush is a physician who specializes in internal medicine, hospice care, and endocrinology. In his career, he has delivered babies, he's been on the front lines of cancer research, and after realizing that no matter how much money we make as a society, and no matter how advanced we get in the world of science, we are still getting chronically sicker as a society. He decided to move away from his career in Western medicine to become an internationally recognized speaker, researcher, and very passionate soil scientist. He speaks a lot about the microbiome, and at the end of the day, his philosophy comes back to the fact that all of our health issues can be traced to how we have treated and depleted our soils. And he believes that as we slow down and stop commodifying and overusing this precious, life-giving resource that creates everything that we breathe and eat, as we restore our relationship with that soil, we also begin to restore our relationship with ourselves, with each other, with planet Earth, and with our bodies. In this episode, we explore the misleading belief that disease is something that happens to human bodies versus something that naturally results from humans being completely disconnected from nature. We talk a lot about how alternative medicine and functional medicine is sort of just becoming this new version of allopathic medicine where now everyone is being prescribed these fancy and expensive vitamin C IV drips and supplements. We, of course, bring it back to relationship, which is a huge theme this season and will continue to unfold, where he talks about how witnessing and being witnessed and restoring our connection to each other is the way that we are going to heal one another. He's going to talk about how we've lost the wireless communication network between the microbes in our microbiome and how we can start to restore that through ancient soil and through restoring our connection to the soil and to the dirt that we touch and breathe in every day. We're going to chat a lot about viruses and the virome, how we all have millions of viruses coursing through our blood every day, and how evolutionarily viruses are actually what allowed us to upgrade our DNA and create these beneficial mutations that furthered humanity. We're going to get very spiritual about viruses as well and talk about why when you are sick, not only is that virus asking you to slow down and receive a different vision of a path for your life, to make some changes in your life that will help you evolve, and why also when you're sick with a virus, you often get lucid dreams or very vivid dreams, or certain messages and insights, and your intuition can actually be highlighted while you're sick and laying in bed and finally being forced to be still. We're going to talk about long COVID and how he was witnessing people deal with long haul viral symptoms long before COVID itself, and how people have been suffering with chronic fatigue from viruses for ages, and what that actually means and what's happening in our bodies. We'll talk about blue zones and why the people in blue zones don't actually live as long as they do because they're eating a bunch of beans and sweet potatoes, although that's part of it, but that they actually live so long because their value systems are centered around always being open to others and connection and relationship and deep human love. And of course, we're going to talk about antidotes to things like glyphosate that are destroying our gut barrier and messing with our microbiome. And we're going to talk about solutions to diversify your microbiome that go far beyond just eating a bunch of different fibers and vegetables each week, and are actually going to involve you changing your habits and switching up the way you do things, like taking a different route home from work with the windows open so that you get different microbes that you're breathing in. This is such a wonderful episode. I listened to it maybe 5 times while I was editing because you kind of have to let what he's saying sink into your psyche. It's so profound, and I think you guys are really going to like this one. If you want to support the show, I don't have a code for one of my formulas today, or a new code rather, because our code HORMONES15 is still active from last week's episode with Lauren. If you didn't listen to that one and you're someone who's on their strength training journey and you're trying to optimize your hormones, definitely go back and listen, and you'll hear at the top of the show the 4 formulas that are discounted on my site with the code HORMONES15. That's Glucobitters, ThyroPro, Bloat BFF, and Mighty Minerals. And so instead of giving you guys a new code for my formulas to go with the show today, Zach and his team were kind enough to give us a code for his formula, his ion biome supplement that contains ancient soil to help repair your gut lining and your microbiome. He spoke about it a bit in this episode so that you can get a feel for this really revolutionary soil-derived supplement that he's created that helps to repair that first line of defense, that gut barrier, your immune defense, your defense against allergic symptoms. And I've taken Ion Biome myself on and off for years, ever since I first learned about Zach. And actually, my dog Banks takes the pet version of Ion Biome every single day because he was having some skin and allergic issues like hot spots and some food allergies. And so when we first went to a holistic vet, our vet actually recommended Zach's formula. So he's been on that ever since, and he's gotten so much better. It's really helped his gut and his allergies. And of course, it makes sense because our pets are just as affected by glyphosate and other environmental insults on the gut as we are. So I can highly recommend his supplement for pets and, of course, for humans. And so if by any chance, after you hear him talk about his supplement throughout the show and you're interested in trying it for you or your pet or your family, he's given us a code ORGANICOLIVIA for 15% off if you go to intelligenceofnature.com. So I'll put that in the show notes. Again, no pressure, just another way to support the show and support Zach's work. And let's get into the episode. Enjoy, guys. Welcome to the show.
How are you going to grow if you don't know where you're growing from?
Whoa.
This is the scientific proof of grace.
That's wild.
What is healthy to you?
I've just moved toward liberation. Let's get juicy. So can you start by taking us on a soil journey? How did we get here and what is here? Yeah. Who's behind all of this and what predicament we're even in right now?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, humanity finds itself at a really interesting point right now in which our human health is starting to express the stress of a planet. And this is really new science in some ways, in that by the early 1990s, when I was starting my medical training, I really believed, and so did the entire industry of medicine, that I was going to be the first, generation of doctors that would be able to practice personalized medicine. We would go in and swab the cheek of a patient, run their genetics, tell them exactly what genes they had, which made them at risk for which diseases, which made them, available to which drugs were going to work for their diseases, and it was just going to be perfect. And then 1996 rolled around and the human genome got decoded, and we suddenly realized we didn't have a fraction of the genome that we thought we did. We were expecting 300, 400,000 genes, and we've come to find out that we only had 20,000 genes. And so we got to this moment in human history where we suddenly realized that we sit somewhere between a fruit fly, which has 13,000 genes, and a flea that has 30,000 genes. And so that we had so few genes was such a new mystery in the human condition. And that led us to the discovery of epigenetics. And epigenetics has led us into this new realization that we are the expression of the environment. The environment is constantly expressing itself through the human experience, starting with our genes, but then going to the macro of human behavior, all the way from our human intelligence, as we like to call it, which is really an ecosystem's intelligence expressing itself through a single neurology, or a human genome, as we've come to call it. But we realize that only 1.5% of the DNA we carry is a human gene, and the rest of it is the ecosystem. And so we carry so much ecosystem within us, and for this we have genetic complexity, and for this we have intelligence. And in the midst of this, we just proceeded through a century of the deepest destruction of our ecosystems in human history, of our 300,000 years. And so, unbeknownst to us, we were going to develop the science of discovering our own destruction at the very moment we had created our destruction. And so as we start to dig deeper into what is this chronic disease crisis that developed in the 1980s and 90s and really exploded in the early 2000s, what that is really an expression of an ecosystem collapse around the planet. And as we look at ecosystems, the epicenter seems to be sitting in soils. Over the last 100 years, we have depleted or severely depleted 97% of the arable farmland in the world. And so this number of 97% depleted is starting to reflect how humans can produce such extreme rates of disease. In 1992, when I started my medical journey, in a lot of ways, I realized that I was going to be empowered to solve human disease. And it was such a heady egoic, journey in so many ways, only to find out that we would really be that generation of doctors that would watch the most severe collapse of human health rather than the solutions for that, disease belief system. And so this has been a humbling journey for Western medicine at large. It's been a humbling journey for humanity at large as we have come into the reality that, wow, no matter how much money we have, we can't actually solve our own health. We can't buy our way out of this crisis. And the biggest economy in the world is definitely the United States, $17 trillion GDP. And yet you find out that we have the worst health outcomes in the world for all of that wealth. And so we have the highest rates of death on day one, for example. And so we have the highest neonatal death in any developed country in the world. The only places you can find higher rates of death on day one is like in war-torn states of Somalia and some other countries. But in any country that's not actively blowing each other's children up, we have the highest rates of death. And so that then plays into highest rates of childhood cancer, highest rates of autism, highest rates of neurodegenerative conditions in adults. So from stem to stern, our wealth has mapped to disease rather than health. And so this is ultimately how it has played out around the world is that the more abstract wealth that you create that separates you from nature, the less nature you have access to. And the less nature you have access to, the more degenerative your own genetics, the more degenerative your own health becomes.
Is that because the more abstract wealth you accumulate, the more that you associate joy with stuff and the accumulation of human-made things versus the simplistic experiences of being alive?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the expression of that wealth, right? So as the abstract wealth accumulates, we tend to be inspired to try to pursue something outside of ourselves to make us happy, right? And so we're that consumer mentality. And the fact that we've been labeled consumers as the public of the world now is a really indicative, nomenclature for what we did. We became consumers. What we should really be is producers. We should be the most creative species on the planet. We should be able to create more autonomy and ingenuity and inventiveness than any other species on the planet for what we've been endowed with. And yet we have used it for the opposite. We've used it to create dependence rather than independence. We've used it to create disease rather than vitality. And so the abstract system of wealth has correlated with these consumer behaviors or these consumer identities that we've taken on, because when your money and your value system to getting that money is no longer real, it's all abstract. The most extreme abstractness is probably things like your blockchain currencies, Bitcoin and NFTs, and we're going to start buying stuff that is just flat out unreal.
Or even a Birkin bag that's worth $60,000, just to say that. That's so abstract.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good example of the value we put on things have become disconnected with their real existence, right? And so it's interesting that as we have looked for alternatives to the current things, we've tended in the same direction of abstractness, right? And this certainly works in the world of Bitcoin and NFTs, but you can also just look at the macro governments doing the same thing, which is carbon credits. And so our carbon offsets, carbon credits is now a $40 trillion economy between now and 2050. $40 trillion is more than anybody's GDP, everything else. And we're saying that's all just CO2 carbon offsets and all of that. And it turns out that CO2 is actually the gift to biology, not the enemy of biology. And so our goal is to diminish CO2 within the atmosphere when we should really be increasing CO2 within our plant life, And so we need to start to look at the fact that our solutions to abstract economies are more severely abstract than the problems that created it. And so we keep going more and more abstract in our solutioning. And I was very much, in this world. The concept that cancer has occurred in your body and therefore you must poison your body with chemotherapy is what I was doing. And so by the end of my medical career in academia, I was developing chemotherapy for these specific cancers and tumors. And I was really passionate about it. For years, I was like, I have got this solution because it's actually vitamin A compounds kill cancer. And I was so excited because vitamin A is less toxic than a lot of the poisons we're using for chemotherapy. once I got that from benchtop all the way to clinical trial, the very first patient that I sat down with had this intuitive hit that she wasn't supposed to take these capsules. And I spent the next hour breaking her intuition and breaking her relationship to self ultimately so that she would swallow those capsules. And they didn't hurt her. They were fine. She swallowed them. And I went home that night with this like pit in my stomach that it would take me actually years to figure out, but it should have been my most elative moment in my career to that point. I had this deep insecurity or wound within me from watching my first patient enter my first clinical trial. And it was for that experience, ultimately, in hindsight, of I have been trained to be a practitioner or technician of drugs. And to get people to believe in those drugs, I have to break their innate connection to intuition, to their own health, and to their own belief that they actually can heal from within. I literally spent that hour convincing that woman she could not heal without a drug. Fast forward 15 years, and it took me that long to work with teams of integrated people that were drawn to my clinic. I left the university in 2010, started a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease through food. Thought I had given up research altogether, and by 2012 had the opportunity with a colleague to start my own biotech lab, and that's become a laboratory now, a dozen years later, that has 10x the resources and the tools and the scientific prowess than my chemotherapy lab did. And so I'm doing better science now than I was then, with just genius researchers in the lab now. And we're getting to ask the most exciting questions, where instead of having to ask a question that leads to a drug development, we get to ask the question of how do humans heal and how does nature connect to humans to accelerate that healing? And the answers are really, really exciting. And it's just been a really stimulating, decade or more of seeing things happen under microscopes that just completely demolish the whole disease model that I had been given, not just of cancer, but I'm an endocrinologist by training, so it was diabetes and obesity and fertility issues and all that. And so it was really, shattering every microscopic journey we took into the relationship between humans and planet, was demolishing our belief that diseases happened to human bodies. Diseases emerge from bodies disconnected from nature. And that's been fascinating to kind of really be down there at ground zero. And for that, it gave us a passion for the vision of regenerating the world's soils. And so we started on a mission of really helping consumers in the West embrace an organic diet to try to get herbicides and pesticides out of our diet. So we started a film project going from Minnesota down to Mississippi. It's going to be a 2,000-mile journey, basically, of looking at the way in which all the farm chemicals are consolidating in our single river system of the Mississippi. About 80% of the glyphosate and Roundup and all the herbicides and pesticides being poured into our soils end up in that river system. It's a water-soluble molecule. And our cancer rates go up every mile of the Mississippi River. And so the end of the Mississippi River, those last 90 miles from Baton Rouge to New Orleans and Louisiana, is called Cancer Alley. It's the highest rates of cancer in the entire world. And so we have literally poisoned a river system, and along that path poisoned every animal, human in its wake to create this real deep wound between those humans and their nature by destroying the ecosystem within the soils and ultimately in the water system with it. And so that was our initial journey. So we filmed that in 2018. And unfortunately, or fortunately, on the very first stop, we happened to witness a small group of farmers showing each other that organic soil could be worse than conventionally chemical grown soils. And this was a devastating realization for me, because I thought I had my film crew with me, we had the plan, we had the road trip, and I had very limited dollars, and it was like, we're telling the wrong story. We got the wrong method. And so that took us into this realization that it's not, the chemical agriculture was just an extension. It was a next step in a deeper problem with our farming industry, which was a breaking of our understanding of our relationship to ecosystems and the role of biodiversity in soil health. And so organic certification for a farm or a crop basically says, I'm not going to spray these chemicals, but it says nothing about soil. It says nothing about biodiversity. It says nothing about microbiome. It says nothing about soil nutrients. It says nothing about plant nutrients. Nothing that's actually relevant to the consumer or their prevention or treatment of disease is included in an organic certification. in a strange way, the same thing happened to medicine. A bunch of people jumped out of Western medicine saying, pharmaceutical drugs are bad for you. You shouldn't do that. Here's the new toolbox. And it's IV vitamin C drips, it's vitamin B drips, it's stem cell injections, it's artificial peptide injections. And so as if this is now nature, and this costs more to the consumer than the Western medicine there. So now you're spending $1,200 to $3,000 a month on IV drips to be an alternative health person. And so in the same way that we needed to go beyond organic, we needed to go beyond functional medicine or alternative medicine, and we really needed to correct the deeper philosophical crisis that we were in, which is we're not part of nature. And so this is where we're still at. And the regenerative movement was kind of birthing as we shot that film to the public's awareness. Of course, we've had people preaching this stuff 70 years back. J.R. Riddell was talking about soil health equals human health. But as a philosopher, he didn't really get traction at that time. And so I think it's been necessary for a doctor to jump out of the medical world and say, that soil is our problem. And that has carried more weight, I think, than the farmer saying, hey, we've got the solution. It's been our joy to partner with farmers all over the world now and let the farmers start telling their own story. Because when you start to see a farmer that's solving for their psychological and philosophical disconnects from nature, you get to see abundance come back into their farms. And it's not a coincidence that farmers and physicians have the highest suicide rates of any industries out there. We have both been trained by chemical philosophy of disconnect from nature and a chemical solution for our nature collapse. And so our toolbox that we've been handed, I think, is driving us into this depression, driving us into our suicidality. And it's been really a joy to see how much is born out of a farmer and a doctor sitting in the same field together watching earthworms come back, and just the joy that created in my own life, the reconciliation with myself and my career and my science journey coming to fruition and coming to life in that farm field. And then watching that farmer reach so much success as those earthworms came back and the microbiomes recovered and the abundance of their crops come back and their need for chemical inputs, or, herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, all that goes to zero suddenly. And suddenly their bottom line triples over the first couple of years. And suddenly their kids want to come back to the farm instead of leave the farm as they did 20 years ago. Yes. And we solve for this crisis of succession on farms globally, really. And we start to see real joy starting to seep back in. And joy in this time of human collapse is infectious.
Oh, you're pulling at my heartstrings right now. One of my best friends does a lot of work in Guatemala, and that was one of the first things that she taught me, not just about the monocropping and the problems with the massive cacao farms happening there, where there's just no other biodiversity on the land. It's just cacao, and how little those farmers were making, and how, as a result, their children were moving away to big cities to find other jobs, did not want to continue the agricultural traditions, didn't want to learn from their parents or live off of the land. And because their children devalued the land so highly, essentially the parents then were saying, well, fine, I'll just sell it to the government for this low price they're pitching to me because my children don't want it. Where else is it going to go? And you're giving me so much hope as you're saying that it's not necessarily the organic practices that are going to save the soil, right? It's not that you need to just grow something without pesticides and all of a sudden the farm's going to come back to life. It's doing all of the other things, planting the symbiotic plants around it, giving back to the soil, and perhaps you can share some of the other practices that then, as a consequence, allow organic practices to work, allow less herbicides to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really you're striking on something deep there, which is it's not a farm practice that's going to solve our disconnect from nature. It's a change in the mind. And our farmers that are making this regenerative journey real are telling each other in all the farm conferences and everything else that we attend, they're telling each other that, look, it only takes one season to get a soil system to repair, to start to regenerate. But it takes about 5 years of witnessing that for the farmer's mind to begin to heal. And I think that's really important, because I think that if your goal isn't to heal your own spirit and your own relationship to nature, you're going to be repeating a pattern of patriarchal kind of colonialism on your soil or on your food. You're going to say, well, I'm going to do these 5 things and you're going to heal. And then you wonder why 2 years later things aren't going well. Regenerative farming is freaking tough. Go to a conference, say, these are the 5 things I'm going to do, and I'm going to deploy that, I'm going to work. The only thing I can guarantee you is you're going to be surprised by nature. It's not going to do what you expect it to do. And so really where we see the breakthrough happen is when farmers lose the egoic belief that they need to fix the farm, that they need to fix the soil. And then they come to that same realization that a physician does that sees a patient refusing to take chemotherapy who says, I can heal from within. You need to sit with your farmland long enough for it to tell you, I can heal from within. And that soil will heal itself as you sit quietly and watch. And so this is really, for me, the gold standard of regeneration is silence. The gold standard of a regenerative future, whether we're talking farming and food systems, or we're talking about regenerative economics, or we're talking about regenerative fuel and energy systems, all of those take a long listening period. And you have to wait until listen to nature tell you what the solution is. And interestingly, that was my first day of medical school. My dean came in and said 2 really important things. He said, first of all, the next 4 years will be the most exciting years of your education. Unfortunately, 50% of what we're about to teach you is wrong. And a deeper problem is we're not sure which 50% is wrong. And so he just, straight out of the gate said that we don't know what the hell is going on. Human health is too complicated. It's too miraculous to really tell you that we know what's happening. So that was day one. And then for the next 4 years, I was convinced we did know what we were talking about. And I was given this egoic belief that I was endowed with enough knowledge and enough technical tools and enough resources to fix things. And if it wasn't fixing, it was my fault. And if it was still not being fixed and I was doing everything I could, then I should blame the patient. It's their fault that it's not working or not fixing. So it was putting me in this adversarial situation. Fast forward 30 years later, and I can tell you, I figured out which 50% was wrong with the models that I was taught in Western medicine, and it was 50% of everything. I was told only half truths. And fortunately, the second thing my dean told me at this first day of school was this message that if you sit long enough with a patient, they will always tell you exactly what the problem is. And that if you wait longer and listen longer, they will tell you how to fix it. And I somehow had forgotten or suppressed that information for a long time. And it was almost like in this dream state when I was in a major depression state towards the end of my academia. And in that depression, I needed to find that shift. And those words percolated back up through my awareness. And I remembered this moment, and it suddenly made sense to me that the listening would happen. And so I left the university in 2010 and started this rural clinic, town of 550 people in a food desert, no grocery stores for this county and everything else. So they were eating mostly out of gas stations. And I was a medical doctor, which means I know absolutely nothing about nutrition at the time. And so it was the only place I think I could have gone to feel like I was confident that I could figure out something better than a rotisserie hot dog that had been spinning on the spit for 3 days in the gas station as a food solution. So I went into like the worst possible thing thinking, well, we can go uphill from here. And it was a humbling journey because I actually made a lot of mistakes trying to apply nutrition science to my patients, much like the farmer who hears a conference on regenerative agriculture and goes, applies those 5 things and sees their soil and their crop failing in some way. None of it had told me to listen. And so it was 2 years of mistakes in my clinic. Some patients certainly responding and giving me hope that I was on the right path, but enough were getting worse or not improving to suggest that the models that had been handed to me weren't working. And in those 2 years, I started to develop deep relationships with my patients because I was always in clinic, which is much different than academia or most things where you like have 5 minutes with patients and all that. My typical intake was 2.5 hours with a patient. And when you listen for 2.5 hours to a person's life journey, first of all, you fall in love with these people. You can't know people that well and not fall in love, because you see how much pain and suffering and journey they've been on. And you walk in their moccasins, as I said, for a couple of days, and you're just like so humbled, and you learn so much about the human condition in that long listening. And over those next couple of years, I ended up being able to listen long enough that they started telling me the answers rather than me telling them the answers. And it was that changing of the table that I think really started to reveal to me how much is held within every single individual. You have the wisdom within you. You have the information. So I ended up closing my clinic just a couple of years ago and launching in its place the Journey of Intrinsic Health, which is an 8-week program that basically reintroduces people to your true relationship to self, to food, to water, to breathing, to exercise, all these elements that are necessary for human biology to occur. But we found that you don't do something to the person. You don't give them something to fix that. You let them have space to reform this relationship on their own terms back to these elements of nature, beginning in the first weeks with rediscovering self at a deep level. And the healing usually happens right then. As soon as you rediscover self, you're now on your healing journey. And we found that you had to be witnessed for this to really work. And so we have a coaching program that runs along this. And so for the 8 weeks, you have a coach. We have a group coaching that became even more effective. We launched that during the beginning of the pandemic when we realized how isolated people had suddenly become. They needed a community. And so group coaching became a community experience in addition to a healing journey. And when we put people in that, group of 8 people, and when you start to witness somebody else finding themselves the beauty again, you fall in love. But then you see a healing journey that just inspires your own reconnection, your own self. So it's become this beautiful kind of sacred geometry within these small groups of 8, where we get to see healing, not just in the body, but in the mind, and then ultimately within this society that they start to express. And so we ended up having to launch a community app to try to capture how much energy was coming out of this. And so now we have a community that runs year long of the people that are going through or have come through the program. And they've created their own business accelerators. They've created poetry workshops and groups. Like, it's just an amazing amount of creative capacity that's coming out of these people. And what's happening is they are forming a new social and societal framework based on their own reconnection to self. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, my last 30 years of medical career to get me to the point where I get to just listen and witness the beauty of health emerging from individuals rather than prescribing some sort of, toolbox to them to find that health.
It sounds to me like you're creating the true social network, or a true social network, whereas I feel the way in which we engage with social networks and social media in this day and age is only a further reflection as to how sick and disconnected we are. Because as you say, that one must fully be witnessed by another to experience deep healing. There's medicine in simply witnessing and simply seeing someone. Something I've been grappling with recently in my own life is the way that it works to be a person on the internet, an influencer, a public figure, where there is this pseudo relationship with those in your community, and yet they never actually get to be witnessed by you. And you also never get to fully be witnessed because you cannot fully exist as yourself in a 2D form. And we may feel that we're going on these social networks to socialize, but I feel that it's further bastardizing the way in which we are truly meant to connect and witness one another.
And this is the birth of the podcast. And so the podcast came in as a solution to this abstract community, social kind of network that you're describing there. And the reason why we are now consuming, exponentially more hours of podcast than we are network television, which is, the network could not have imagined 10 years ago that this is going to be the landscape they were dealing with. But watch the number of hours, dedicated in human attention right now to a podcast versus any other network, and it's logarithmically different. So we are enthralled right now by deep, long-form human conversations because they're delivering the reality that we're craving. And it's only in you and I getting to know each other over, hour and a half or whatever we end up talking for. That's you and I not only falling in love with one another as a human entity, we're falling in love with humanity again because we can see the hope and the inspiration that each of us does carry as these nuggets of joy and real faith that we hold within ourselves. And so I think the podcast is kind of that, one of the many expressions of a regenerative media system where it's like we've got to fix the soil. We're not going to do it until we listen to each other long enough.
You mentioned this dependence versus interdependence. You mentioned this strong knowing and relationship with the self. And I think this reminds me a bit of, I think the same patterns that you're noticing tangibly in the soil that can be measured and can be seen through that loss of biodiversity, I'm picking up on in human relationships where I'm seeing a lot of this codependency or this feeling where a lot of people just can't get it right with one another. One person is taking more than they're giving. One person is dependent on another for validation or this external source of love rather than this true connection to self. Even earlier when we mentioned the Birkin bag being valued at $60,000 and people feeling that they need to have a Birkin bag or a designer on them in order to have a sense of identity or worth. That's this false connection to self, not that true connection to self, just like we're having this false connection in relationship to, I love you for what you can do for me, that codependency versus that interdependence of how can we just witness and see and be with one another and not do for one another, take on for one another. And so, yeah.
It's so well said. It's so well said. And I think what we're going to ultimately get to is that, when we start to realign value systems with the soil, we're going to fix the whole thing. To your point, I think what you're kind of leaning into there is that micro to macro reality, that what's true under my microscope in my lab is true at the societal level. And if we look at the lessons we've learned from soil, I can go into like four of kind of the general, massive breakthroughs that we've discovered that nature does. In soils, specifically with soil in relationship to human cells. So we stumbled upon, as we started looking into nutrient deficiency and deficiency of the medicine within our food, this was 2012, as I was watching nutrition science not work in my patients anymore. We started asking what's changed between 1970s when all this food science was created and now, like why isn't the food working? Kale should work. Cauliflower should work, Brussels sprouts should work, broccoli should work. These cruciferous vegetables are so loaded with alkaloids that are the medicine within our food that we should be able to cure just about anything with these. And yet we were finding that patients were actually more often reacting negatively to these medicines and not working. So we were diving in, and what we ended up finding was when a colleague brought in a 90-page white paper on soil science, is that the large carbon molecules that were depicted in this white paper on soil looked a lot like the chemotherapy I used to make. And so there was an aha moment for me that, oh my gosh, we've been looking at plants forever for hoping to find the medicines for humanity. Chinese medicine for 9,000 years looked to the herbs and plants. What if there's a deeper medicine within the soil before it even makes a plant? And so that started us on this whole new journey of what is the medicine inside of soil, dirt, ultimately, what is that? And what we uncovered was that when, microbiome, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, when they consume nutrients, they have this byproduct or this metabolite family that are these small carbon molecules. And each species of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, etc., makes a different subset of these carbon molecules. So we came to call them carbon snowflakes, with the understanding that every snowflake is a different shape. And all of these carbon molecules in their vast variety, when they are suspended in a living water system, they actually can pass information. So they function as a redox communication network is the scientific term. But what that physically means is that it's basically functioning as a wireless network similar to your cell phone. It's interesting that your cell is called a cell because it's just like that cell, a human cell is a system of a great society, 70 trillion human cells. And so dwarfs the 8 billion humans and their cell phones right now. But those cells learned how to communicate through wireless communication long before our first cell phone towers. But your cell needs the wireless communication to become part of that larger organism of humanity. And so we found the wireless communication network. And it's pretty cool that the cell phone towers that make human cells talk aren't made by human cells. They're made by bacteria and fungi in your body. And this was a major breakthrough for us because at this point, 2012, when all this was happening in my lab, we had for about 4 or 5 years been getting more and more science out of the academic world globally that somehow the microbiome in our gut was mapping to diseases. You start to lose biodiversity in these bacteria or go extinct, and suddenly you get breast cancer. You lose these bacteria and you get lung cancer. You get these out and you get major depression. You lose these and you end up with an autoimmune condition. The bacteria didn't make sense as to why it would cause a human disease because we didn't have a model of connectivity. And with the discovery of the wireless network, it suddenly made sense. Oh my gosh, if you start to lose, these 7 cell phone towers, of course, the liver can't hear the rest of the organ system. You lost the cell phone towers. And just in the same way that your cell phone, when too far from the cell phone tower, you can't get connected. So nobody's getting text messages to you. Your calendar can't update. You can't log onto the Zoom. You can't get an Uber. So transportation fails, communication fails. You start to become disconnected from your larger human organism, and you start to drain the energy out of those that are in relationship with you, because they're like, where is she? I can't find her. I needed this thing from her. Suddenly your contribution is not only missing, the missing of it starts to slow down other people's productivity. And so one cell phone goes down due to disconnect of the wireless network, and the whole system starts to go down. In human biology, that one cell phone disconnected has a special term, and it's called a cancer cell. A cancer cell is a isolated cell in the human body, and that's it. There's no problem with it. It's not malignant. It's not trying to hurt you. It just got disconnected. And in its total isolation, it starts to lose its identity. And when a cell starts to lose its identity, it starts to lose its purpose or connectivity to the greater environment around it in a deeper way. And when it starts to get completely isolated and lose its original identity, which was, I'm a liver cell in a complex human body of multiple organs and we all work together, it starts to lose connection, and then it starts to lose identity as a liver cell, and it starts to look like a primordial kind of fibroblast, like the beginning of cells starts to morph back towards what looks like a stem cell. As you're losing that identity, it starts to think that it's the only thing left alive. And the only thing left alive has a drive for life. But in its total isolation, and now imagine a cell that believes all other organisms have failed, and it's the last semblance of life. And it's so injured that it can't actually repair itself now. It has so many accumulated injuries for its isolation that it can't repair. So its only option to preserve life in the universe is to divide. And so it starts to divide, and it's just division. And its whole purpose now is just survive. And then the cancer cell dies at a faster rate than really any other cell in the body, and it's so damaged and it's dying so fast, and it's just trying to rebirth, just so that a few cells can survive. And all that proliferation ends up making a tumor. And the tumor starts to get to a point where it has a metabolic demand that starts to drain the entire organism. So, well, it's just one cell of your 70 trillion that became isolated. It can take down the whole organism, as it believes it's the only thing left on Earth. And so cancer is ultimately the most injured cell, the most lonely cell in your body that is desperately trying to keep you alive. And in its desperate attempt, it kills you. And so I think that we see this at the macro level that you're talking about. Isolation of a single cell, ultimately your phone perhaps, but think of the human next to it. Isolation of a human leads to mental health collapse, and that mental health collapse leads to that human eventually believing it's the only thing left, and that ego shield of fear, guilt, and shame and everything else being wielded around it makes that cancer cell climb up a tower in Las Vegas and shoot 250 strangers. And so the violence that we see towards one another, school shootings or violence out there in the world, the wars that we are starting as nations towards one another, that we can start wars and bomb and slaughter the children of another peoples and claim victory over that. I mean, it just doesn't get any darker than our current condition as humans. And it's because we've all become so isolated that we're all functioning as cancer cells now. And it only takes a little bit of reconnection to reverse all of that. Kids all the way to 80, 90-year-olds in my clinic with cancer, by and large, a year into that journey with any of those patients at any age, they say that cancer was the best gift of my life because it reordered my relationship to everything. And it went away only when my relationship to everything changed. Me fighting against my cancer, me thinking I'm in battle against the one cell in my body that was lonely, doesn't solve cancer. You can never heal your cancer in fear, guilt, or shame around that relationship to that cancer within you. The cancer is literally your path forward. And so you have to go into it with gratitude, and you have to go into that cancer journey with a sense of curiosity within that. What am I going to discover in here? What set me up to express stress that doesn't come through just my life, but ancestral stress is now expressing itself in this cancer? What did my ancestors leave unhealed in themselves that I am now expressing in this cancer? And that sends you into a totally different thing of, oh, this is me not healing myself. This is me healing 40 generations backwards and stopping the trauma now and beginning a healing for 40 generations forward. And that just gives such a beautiful perspective on the rich opportunity every dis-ease that we are now expressing gives us. This is our time for a fresh slate. This is the beginning and the end of all things. And so this death rebirth process that each of us are in is probably going to include a disease of some sort because we've brought human biology to its knees. We've brought ourselves to a foundation of disease that is going to take every one of us to at least one degree of separation from one of these diseases. And in that journey, we will find our new beginning. We'll find our rebirth. And I think that rebirth is going to be spectacular. I think that we have something to express within our biology that no other species is presenting, not just on the planet, but perhaps within the cosmos, like within the entire universe. The energies of this planet manifested a species that's capable of feeling, but not just feeling, seeing. Our five senses give us a capacity to see nature in a very unique way. And we've started to uncover that nature in all of the other species sees the world differently. It doesn't see color, it sees vibration, it sees energy, all this. So whether it's a bat or an insect or a monkey, they're seeing the world differently than human perception. And the unique human perception is that we are separate from everything. And in seeing the sunset as separate from ourselves, it actually gives us just enough distance to just see how spectacularly beautiful that sunset is. And so humans line up along every coast and watch the sun drop into the ocean, and we just are in awe and amazement and wonderment of the colors and their silence as we just give reverence to the beauty of nature. Meanwhile, the birds are swooping around doing their thing. The monkeys are up in the trees in Africa. Nobody's paying attention to the sunset except humans. And so, yes, the animals know the sun is setting, but they're part of the sunset. They don't see it as separate, and so they're not stopping in awe of the beauty. And so the very wound that we have expressed, we're separate from nature, therefore we have to kill it, is actually our path forward. Again, in the wound is the antidote. And so we need to move into our belief of separateness. We need to move into our perception of separateness to find out the gift and the antidote that lies inside of that is our ability to see beauty. And when we see beauty, we vibrate as an organism in this frequency that in our language has become known as love. But love isn't an emotion, it's a feeling or a vibration that occurs when your organism witnesses beauty. And so I think this is the secret of why we're here. What we're here to do is to witness beauty in every single thing and start to let that vibration of love that we experience in that reinforce the vitality within everything. And so this is what we're discovering in my laboratory, is that when we put those human cells in touch with ancient soil systems and the wireless communication network goes back on, the first thing that the human cells do is start to build tight junctions, which are the boundaries between different parts of nature. And so the beginning of health is knowing yourself. You can't know yourself until you have a healthy boundary. And so in a fascinating way, we're discovering that soil and your connection to biodiversity within the soil beneath your feet, which becomes the biodiversity in soil within your gut. That biodiversity is giving you the boundary event that allows you to know self. And your immune system sits right behind that gut lining, and it is what figures out what's self and what's not. So that's step one, is healthy boundaries, know yourself. Step two is watching these same molecules with their wireless communication network from the microbiome touch the mitochondria inside of the human cells. So inside your human cells, 70 trillion human cells, are in each of those cells 200 mitochondria. Unless it's a brain cell or a nerve, in which case you're at 2,000 mitochondria inside of every one of those cells. And so inside a human body, 70 trillion human cells is actually 14 quadrillion mitochondria. It is a vast organic garden inside of you. These are inside your cells, 200 tiny little bacteria living inside every human cell. And they're different species in that they change their genetics all of the time. So even in a single human cell, you can have dozens of different genetic sequences or species expressions of the mitochondria in a single human cell. So the ecosystem is just vast and complicated and beautiful within you. And when the wireless communication network goes back on, all of those mitochondria jump 30-40% efficiency in making energy. And so healthy boundaries leads to increase in energy production, which increases your speed of healing. And with that speed of healing repaired, you get to a point where there's no more injury, and now you can create. And so now you're creating new possibility for expression. You're creating new neurons. You're creating new hormonal pathways. You're creating new possibilities for human expression. You're creating literally new genetic code, because every one of our bodies is being introduced to new genetic possibilities every day. We're very plastic in our genes. It's not like I inherited this from mom and dad and that's all I have. Every day, every cell in my body is choosing new genes, and we do that through viruses. And so viruses are really the gift of nature to the possibilities of a future we haven't seen yet. Viruses are bringing the genetic codes of a future species or future biology on this planet that we can't imagine yet. It was through critical updates or critical adoption of viruses that allowed mammals to occur. It took 5 very important viruses to come along to give us new abilities, new gain of function, such that we no longer needed an egg like the reptiles or the birds that came. We suddenly had live birth. But to get to live birth, we needed retrovirus to show us how to make proteins that would allow a womb to hold an embryonic sac, and that live birth could happen with a mature, kind of biology starting to come together within that womb. And then we needed new genetics of the sperm to allow that to become live birth capable and all this stuff. So it was just fascinating that our mammals and then ultimately our humanness came out of the whole imagination of the genetics of the entire planet working together. And we call that the virome. The virome is a description of the entire database of possibilities of new genetics. And so while we've been demonizing viruses the last few years, it is in fact, again, it can be a wound if you're not in a healthy microbiology, if you're in an unbalanced immune system, you don't have healthy boundaries and all this, you can get sick.
Yeah.
Sickness, of course, is your path back towards health.
Yeah.
You need the rest. You need the fever. You need the reset. And you need the new gene. And so it gets pretty interesting that nature is waiting to re-express itself, not just through humans, but through every DNA strand on this planet. And every time we have an extinction event, she makes more beauty, more biodiversity, more intelligence happen. And so the viruses that are left behind, the stress of organisms, and when we are stressed, we make more viruses. I'm making viruses all the time. Inside my bloodstream right now, I have 10 to the 9th viruses. It's around 10 billion different viruses coursing through my bloodstream right now. And every one of my cells is surveilling that massive library. And one of my cells might just be like, I think that one is it. I'm going to try to make that one and see what protein I get out of that. And our cells are deciding all the time, trying this one out, trying this out. And when something suddenly says, oh my gosh, here's an update, I'm going to do this one. And our whole body does that. It causes fever, it causes a reset, it causes this. But at that moment of quote unquote sickness, that's your body's holistic decision to upgrade its genetics. And so this is the natural interaction with viruses. And we're learning how, since the 1990s, the governments have all been trying to do biowarfare with viruses and all kinds of negative stuff. So humans, once they get a hold of things in fear, guilt, and shame, can do horrible things. But nature's version of a virus is always a genetic possibility for a future good. It is never against us. If viruses were against us, then my 10 billion viruses would kill me instantly right now. Viruses don't take over human apparatus. Viruses don't take over our genetics. They're always there as an option and an opportunity, a possibility of the future. And so we need to reinvigorate ourselves that as we change our consciousness, as we change our connection to nature, our boundaries go up, our energy goes up, and with new energy, we have new genetic possibilities, and our intelligence of what we select gets better and better. And so that when you are exposed to viruses that are making many people sick, instead of getting sick, you actually have an update, an experience of elevation. And for me, this came through lucid dreams in the recent pandemic. Did you get that experience?
Every time I have a virus,
lucid dreams.
I have dreams that quite literally give me keys to things or people in my life. I was just about to say, and I hate to cut you off, but I'm bubbling with viral.
This is it. Your viral excitement.
Magic, yes, viral excitement, because on the one hand, I recently had a virus in September, October that was very strange, and it started in my neck, and it essentially stopped me from being able to move my neck, bend my neck. I had to quite literally set boundaries physically because I could only sit up like this. I couldn't turn and give someone my entire belly button and slouch and acquiesce to them. And I had to be around people like this. And I noticed when people did not like when I was sitting like this in my power. It started to make people behave differently towards me purely because of the way that I was forced to sit. And then the virus went into my eye and I got viral conjunctivitis. And I was so ill from this virus that I had to participate in work events in a lesser capacity, which showed me that I actually need to be participating in work in a lesser capacity, period. And it also brought me these dreams that allowed me to make really big decisions in my life. And not only did it bring me dreams, but one of my best friends, the day before I left or the morning that I left for my trip to LA, where I ended up getting the virus, she had the same dream. And so her dream revealed half of the message for me. And then when I had the same dream that she had, it revealed the other half of the message for me. And that was while I had the virus, I got the full download. It's really an interesting phenomenon. And I felt that virus specifically helped me to set boundaries and see certain things in my life that I needed to see. And likewise, those who listen to the show are probably familiar with my parents' journey with COVID, both of my parents who are very much microbiome compromised, metabolically unwell, spiritually have been tortured in their lives because of disconnection and, generational trauma in their lineages. It's no wonder that the virus hit them so hard. But interestingly, they were some of the first folks in New York to come down with COVID. And one of them was put on the vent. The other one was put in the ICU. And one thing I noticed when my father came home after his journey with COVID, not only was he forced to go through the period of rest in the hospital, where he started having hallucinations and lucid dreams and revealing things about his own life that he never had the time to think about before. But he came back to my house and he lived with me for a month to recover. And during that time, he started to read me passages from a book he was reading about how the animals at Yellowstone, certain species of animals are starting to come back and how the ecosystem is changing there. And as he was talking about these animals, he started to cry. And my father never in my life has talked about ecosystems or cried. And this was all because he had the time to just take a step out of his do, provide, don't feel anything life due to this virus that almost took him.
Such a perfect story.
Yeah.
Such a perfect story. I've seen it in my own life, and I've seen it and I think we could, your example there, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that there's a lot of people listening right now that are either affected by this or know somebody who's affected by what's now being termed long COVID.
Yes.
Chronic fatigue, brain fog, chronic pain, all these things. Well, that was happening before COVID. My clinic has been for 2 decades full, especially of young women with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, brain fog, all insomnias. And so COVID may have unmasked this in people that hadn't yet experienced it, but I can guarantee you this was public enemy experience number one here. Yeah. And so we were in this condition pre-virus, and we have accelerated the expression of this post-virus. The people that have gone through the experience, they nearly died, or they just got sick, or they were barely sick, but they had the lucid dream, they had the thing, and they redirected, they were off and running.
Yes.
If you're in long COVID, it means the virus is still with you because it's the only thing keeping the brakes on from letting you return to your previous life. As soon as you become willing to listen to your highest self, listen to the universe, listen to the nature around you and inside of you for your new direction in your health, then you will be released. You will be released of all disease when you allow the divine within you to express the life around you. Disease is happening to redirect us to this moment of rebirth. And that rebirth is not coming from human biology. It's coming from that higher self, this template of energy that was in your mother's womb. It came into your mother's womb so that you could self-organize from one cell into 70 trillion cells that harbor 14 quadrillion mitochondria that interact with 1.4 quadrillion bacteria and fungi as soon as you come through the birth canal. You became a universe in your complexity, in your numbers, in your brightness. A single cubic centimeter of mitochondria within all of our cells burns about 10,000 times brighter, releases 10,000 times more sunlight than 1 cubic centimeter of the sun. You're 10,000 times brighter per cubic centimeter than physics because you are biology. Biology is a concentration of light energy that allows life to occur. You're not physics, you're biology. But your template of your higher self that we might call a soul, that predated a human body before you were biology, is unperturbed. It is unchanged by the human emotions, human trauma, human experiences overall. So you have a perfect template that you knit yourself together in your perfection in the womb of your mother that is still yours and is still available to you. There's a guided meditation that I created towards this end. It's on my website just for you. Just listen to it. It's called Anatomy of the Soul. Anatomy of the Soul is this guided meditation that takes you into understanding where in your body that geometry is, that sacred math that coded you together, and allows you to tap back into that information. And so as you are being called by your sickness, by your illness, by your dis-ease to slow down, if you become willing to be slow in your healing, and if you start to talk to yourself and be like, wait a second, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it. I'm not allowed to think. I'm not allowed to feel much energy. I'm not allowed to do anything. I'm not allowed to slouch. I have to sit just like this every day because I have chronic disease. I get it. I'm supposed to be still. I will be still in my healthy body until I know my new self, my new direction, my new thing. And suddenly your energy will go up, your confluence will go up, your self will go up, and you will start to have lucid dreaming, and you will start to have daydreaming and meditations that are guiding you into your purpose to be here in this moment. It's high. It is a high purpose. You were picked at this moment to be here with 8 billion other peoples, to be part of the solution, to be part of the re-expression, the rebirth. But you have to slow down. You have to die within yourself before you can rebirth. And so there's pieces of you right now, whether you're feeling good or not, I guarantee you there's pieces of you that need to die for the newness to come through, for the rebirth to happen. And so can you be still in your health and vitality, or can you be still long enough for your body to let go of the need for dis-ease, the need for the chronic fatigue, the need for the pain, so that you can allow vision to occur? And a great quote was just given to me by Lynn Twist, who's on the board of one of my nonprofits. And Lynn, who's one of the magnates and brilliant minds of the 20th century, she was the operating force behind the Hunger Project to tackle world hunger in the 1980s and 90s. And then she became the founder through her dream work, which led her to the Pachamama Network and Alliance that she now runs, which is really healing humans' relationship to our understanding of ecosystems through the Amazon and other eco biospheres within the planet. But she said to me the other day, she said, pain pushes us forward until vision can pull us forward. Pain will push you forward until vision can pull you forward. And so if you are in pain, if you are in exhaustion right now listening to this, slow down and be willing for your vision to pull you forward so that your pain can stop pushing you forward. Your pain, your fatigue, your brain fog, your insomnia, your low sex drive, infertility, whatever you're facing right now is showing you that the path that you were on is a dead end. It is not your path forward. So do not be frustrated that your body and your mind are not letting you follow a dead end path. Instead, be willing to see the new door open. And your dreams will start leading you there. Your being will start leading you there. And I just honor each of you in the discomfort. And I want to encourage you about what we see next as your boundaries heal in your relationship to soil systems. As your energy systems go up at the mitochondrial level, your body starts to go into a fluent communication of what's needed for your next vitality. And that is delivered in nutrient density. And we're finding that the same carbon molecules that are the communication network from fossil soils have an incredible capacity to carry nutrients to distant parts of your body. And so what we're seeing is that our sledgehammer approach to dietary supplements, multivitamins, where you're taking thousands of international units of, vitamin D or magnesium or manganese or whatever the heck is in all your vitamin Bs, you are sledgehammering nutrients into your body that can't absorb them because of your lack of microbiome and because of the lack of these carbon molecules in your system. And so we're finding that if you suspend small amounts of nutrients within the liquid, of the soil system, you suddenly get 3,000-fold increases in nutrient delivery throughout the body. And so our dis-ease is largely a starvation of minerals and nutrients at the cellular level. And that began when we broke the microbiome's ability to deliver that. And so you see boundaries go up, you see metabolism and energy systems go up, you see nutrient delivery go up. And then, I think the final kind of excitement in that journey is you see the gap junctions connecting between cells. And the gap junctions are these fiber optic cables that run between all of your cells that traffic light between the cells. As the mitochondria start to release sunlight, and as you start making new fiber optic cables, your whole system goes online like it's never been online. This is kind of, I feel like humanity being disconnected from our soil systems are kind of in the dial-up days of the internet. You're probably a little too young, but some of you listening will remember the dial-up, right? And so that dial-up, you know, that your modem would make this hilarious, goofy noise of all these sounds, which I don't even know why they made the modems do that. I think maybe it just distracted you long enough to be patient for 3 minutes while your modem connected. We've gotten so used to picking up a cell phone and you're instantly connected everywhere. We forget that it took a long time to connect to the internet back in the day. And that's kind of where humans are at the cellular level right now, is in the dial-up days of the internet, where, yeah, you've got some energy. Yeah, you've got some nutrients, but it's going to take you a long time to get those anywhere. And when your rate of injury goes up so fast, you can't repair quick enough, and then you have chronic disease. And so in the end, you can go from dial-up internet to high-speed internet, fiber optic cables, through simply reintroducing ancient soil systems to the human condition. And that's been our 10-year journey with Ion, which is the supplement line we've produced now. And it's just been a fascinating journey into the humbling reality of, we need to envision a world where my supplement company becomes obsolete because every soil on the planet is healthy. And so we took the revenues from that company and we pumped them in to start the film that led to Farmer's Footprint and our regenerative mission of helping solve this crisis of philosophy of our separateness to a philosophy of connectedness, not just for farmers, but turning consumers back into producers, turning consumers back into creative capacity. That's kind of been our mission through Farmer's Footprint, which is now in the U.S. and Australia, the UK, EU, New Zealand starting to come on now. And so we're having to let the West redream itself in the context of our farming and food systems so that we can find this path back towards the soils so that my supplement company doesn't have to deliver an antiquity, but we can actually rebirth capacity on this planet that hasn't existed in the last 55 million years since the last extinction. And it's notable that the last extinction was caused by a death of topsoils. And here we are now, we're the existential threat rather than an asteroid killing the topsoils, and we see extinction happening again. Extinction will always map to the biodiversity that's allowed to happen in soil and water. Today, we are killing that through the chemical agriculture of our world. You mentioned glyphosate earlier. And it's interesting that in the 1970s, we added a chemical to our food and water systems. Today, it's the number one chemical on the planet. We add 4 billion pounds of this stuff to our soil and water every year. It's an 85% of our rainfall. It's an 85% of the air you breathe. You are saturated with this chemical. And everything I just told you, the soil heals, healthy boundaries, increased metabolism of the mitochondria, increased rates of repair and regeneration, increased nutrient density, increase in capacity for light transmission through fiber optic cables. We've been able to show in our laboratory that glyphosate destroys every one of those 5 things. And so in the 1970s, we started adding this chemical to our food system, and we got obesity, which was that collapse of metabolism or energy of the mitochondria. Obesity happened. 10 more years of poisoning those mitochondria, and we got diabetes. Diabetes is now the number one kind of metabolic expression globally. 40 to 60% of people in urban settings are now prediabetes or diabetes. 40 to 60% in rural environments, prediabetes or diabetes. And so it's thought that there's probably a couple billion people on the planet now that either have prediabetes or diabetes. We have diagnosed and are treating over 500 million people with diabetes right now, and most of them are undiagnosed, unrecognized. So this diabetes occurred, and then we fast forward 10 years, and the autoimmune explosion happened because glyphosate destroys the tight junctions, those healthy boundaries between the outside world and your immune system, and suddenly you're reacting to everything. So now you're allergic to everything. So that was 1991. You fast forward to 1998. By that time, maybe it was 2002, somewhere in that framework of the last couple of years of the last century and the beginning of this one, there was a study done that looked at American girls at age 12 and found that 25% of them had antibodies to the thyroid by age 12. 1 in 4 girls has autoimmune disease or thyroid, and most of them don't know that yet. And so we are severely underdiagnosing this autoimmune epidemic that we have. Fast forward another 10 years, 2012, and we have an epidemic of childhood cancers. So metabolic collapse, obesity in our children, then diabetes in our children, then autoimmune disease in our children, and then cancer in our children. That was the 30-year journey of glyphosate in our environment. And so once again, the antidote is in the wound. And so here we are poisoning the soil, and nature's grace is, guess what? There's an antidote sitting in the soil, and it's going to heal it all. And so the beauty is that in our lab, we've been able to show this is the scientific proof of grace. We were able to show, and still every day we got new science even last week that's just doubling down on this all the time. But the more severely you injure a human cell with glyphosate, the more rapid and the more extreme the healing is from the soil that we give back to it. And so when we give fossil soil back to a cell, it will slightly repair it or give you a nice little bit of repair if you've got a small injury. But if you really hammer that cell with glyphosate, the cell will be twice as healthy as it was before the injury if it's intact with that fossil soil. And so nature, in her soils 60 million years ago, planted an antidote to a species behavior that would happen 55 million years later to create the next extinction event. And yet she would place in there not just the healing for her planet, but the healing of that species to become something it had never been before. And so the journey of ION has been just one humbling, awe-inspiring, mesmerizing journey into the beauty and grace that is built into the nature within us. We heal faster than we injure. We heal more extreme than we injured ourselves at every single turn.
A, should I go eat some soil? like slash fossil soil? And B, where did you get fossil soil to create Ion Biome?
Yeah, so we've got about 6 sources around the world now from different plateaus of fossil soil. So soil systems compress over time to become eventually coal. The humus, which is the top living life of the soil system, when that compresses and starts to get buried in layers of future Earth, as it gets buried and pressed, it will become a ore called lignite, and that's where we're extracting these carbon molecules from. So lignite's about 60 million to 80 million years old, and that lignite holds very, very high diversity of these small carbon molecules to make the wireless communication network. And so we developed a technique for extraction, and then we developed a technique for getting the oxygen and hydrogen to bond back to those carbon molecules so that they're kind of in the same function that they had back when the bacteria and fungi first made those. And so we're able to get that diversity and its function back into a liquid state. And so the supplement is a liquid, fossil soil in a liquid state. And in there, it's carrying the mineral and amino acid salts that are the nutrients that it will deliver to you that you're missing from your food system. So it's not just the communication network, but it's nutrient delivery as well. And so when you're on the Ion supplement, you're getting this deep new reservoir of possibility for your body. And a lot of people will start the supplement and be like, well, I've got this gut problem and I'm taking it and I expect that to get better. And what we have found is that your body will heal, whatever it wants first, because its priorities are different than your mind. And a dramatic one was a farmer that called us early on. This was 10 years ago or something. And he called and he's like, I just got out of my attic. And I got to tell you why that's so significant. He said, I was just up in my attic in the farthest road and I was cleaning out this wasp nest that had settled up there. And I'm in the middle of doing that when I suddenly realized I was in my own attic, tucked in this corner, because I have suffered for 4 decades from severe claustrophobia and have never been in my own attic. And he's like, I just started your soil supplement a couple months ago. Is it possible that fossil dirt has got my claustrophobia gone? And so it turns out that we've now seen repeating patterns of this, that our fears of our environment are based on our break of relationship to that environment at the micro level. And when you put up a healthy boundary, your fear of nature starts to go away. And your fear of your relationship to the environment around you, the enclosed or the, sometimes more frightening, the wide open spaces that are around you in this nature of beauty in a universe that is so vast. And so I get excited that the soil can reintroduce ourselves, our minds, our psychologies, our philosophies to our right relationship with the whole, to our right relationship with the vastness of the ecosystems around us. So I get goosebumps every time a human grabs a bottle of that fossil soil, because they're about to experience something no human has experienced. They're about to experience 60 million year old biodiversity that hasn't recurred on our planet since. And so that's been our journey there. And you can join us at Farmer's Footprint if you would, and contribute your genius. We have a huge network of resources there. We've got garden clubs, teach you how to reconnect to the soils in your backyard, get that Kentucky bluegrass out of there, plant a diverse food forest in your backyard. And that's ultimately the solution we're seeing globally. And now we've got projects going all over the world. And what we're finding is that if your first step is food sustainability and food sovereignty, food independence in your own backyard, it doesn't matter which socioeconomic world you live in, you are about to recreate your relationship to nature. Your stress levels go down to lower levels than ever when you find out you can feed your own family and your neighbors with the food you're growing in your backyard. These are the empowerment things that will be the new civilization when we find out we don't need to consume. We don't need to be consumers. We can be producers. We can work in the CSA up the road. We can shop at the farmer's market. We can get reconnected, and we can volunteer on the weekends at our community gardens. We can encourage our communities to start to build gardens back into our cityscapes. We can encourage our rural communities to start to embrace the outdoors they have around them and start to re-engage biodiversity in those spaces. And so it's just a journey of invitation to you to join what's now a pretty vibrant community of hundreds of thousands of people around the world now engaged in these projects that I've mentioned. And it's an opportunity for you to join that, because without you, we don't have our maximum biodiversity. And each of you listening has a unique identity that is not represented by the rest of the whole. And that's why you're here. You have an original design that is a perfect, unique fingerprint of the divine. You came out of vacuum space to self-organize yourself into a human body right now. You did that in your mother's womb with no instruction booklet. You just did that. And you became you. And then you got absolutely deprogrammed, and you got absolutely brainwashed into a dream of fear, guilt, and shame towards everything, most of all nature itself. And you're afraid of CO2 in the atmosphere, you're afraid of viruses, you're afraid of germs, you're afraid of everything you can think of, pollen coming from your ginkgo, as you mentioned earlier. It's like we learn to fear everything around us, including the spaces we live within, and the claustrophobia of being human right now is crushing all of us. And we can find a different path forward. We can take the box apart, and we can become our bigger selves.
That's such a hopeful solution and such a beautiful resource that you've created for us. And of course, Biome is also a beautiful resource. I'm wondering if you could give us some other tangible solutions that people can do, or already the things you've mentioned, like volunteering at a community garden, planting more diverse things in your backyard, or just kind of letting the diversity come back in your own backyard. Those are tangible solutions. But what are some other ways that we can start reinstating our microbiome through our weekend activities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we started a campaign called Breathe Your Biome on social media a few years back, and now every Friday you can see kind of a montage of these images that come back to us through the hashtag Breathe Your Biome experiment. And what the message of Breathe Your Biome is that much of the microbiology that ends up in your body isn't coming from your food. It's not like from your cabbage and your fermented vegetables. It's coming from your breath. It's coming from the touch of your skin to nature. The more you touch and breathe nature, the more intelligent your system becomes. And so I would like to see your lifestyle become your reintroduction to nature rather than a supplement or whatnot. And so the way to do this is every day try to touch something different in nature. And for most of us, we're kind of locked in a pattern. I go to my coffee shop this way. I go to work this way. I do this. I have my toothbrush on this side of the sink. My toothbrush is never in the same place, comes in a different sink every day and everything. And start to think that way. How could I change my environment so much that my toothbrush is over here the next day? And just by doing that, the microbiome, believe it or not, is different on the left side of your sink than the right side of your sink because of its distance from the toilet, among other things. And so your microbiome is actually ultimately this incredible exchange of ecosystems. And so as you start to change your pattern, instead of setting your cup there, set it there. Instead of sitting on this side of the table, I'm going to sit on that side of the table. Instead of driving to work that direction, I'm going to go this direction today. And now I'm going to ride my bike instead of take my car. And now tomorrow I'm going to run, but I'm going to go down this path because I can actually cut through roads and I don't have to follow the road. So start thinking really creatively about how you could have a different relationship to nature every single day. And she's going to gift you so much diversity in the path of that change of behavior, of that willingness to receive more. And ultimately, that's the change that we need to do as humans, is we're not here to be human doings. We're here to become those human beings. And to be is to be in a constant state of receiving. And so as you become willing for nature to show you her beauty, you will start to live your highest path, because you as a species are capable of vibrating in love. And so find nature in new ways, engage her in new ways, and you will fall in love with her all over again. You will become a brighter light being in this journey of reconnection in nature. And for that, you will dream new dreams. And in your dreams, we will see a new reality emerge. And we don't have to do that reality. We have to receive that reality. We need to let nature hand us our future rather than tell nature what we're going to do to it. And so this is our opportunity for that deep listening through an experiential daily relationship, a daily relearning of what it means to be in our human nature.
I think I always bring it back to people in my mind, because again, I just see the world through the lens of relationship. I really love to study and observe human relationship. And as I hear you say to put the toothbrush on the left side, I also think about not just that new positioning of the toothbrush, but the importance of meeting new people every day. Hugging them as we hugged when you came here, exposing yourself to different people's bacteria, even not just going to a different coffee shop or a different hiking trail, but people are so important, because then on that emotional, psycho-spiritual level, as you continue to build new relationships, you also continue to diversify the perspectives that you're exposed to move farther away from that sense of isolation and I'm alone. And I think as we get older, there's this proclivity for our brains to either want to stay safe or want to die, because maybe that's just our part of our instinct, reproduce and then die. And I think our worldview gets smaller, and it becomes scarier to walk up to a stranger and say hello. It becomes, harder to take a different path to work or go to an event alone and meet people. And we have to kind of keep fighting against that in a sense until it becomes the healthy, natural thing to do.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. And the human journey there is so fascinating. And there's really no other species that we interact with that has the most opportunity to reinforce that diversity within ourselves. And if we look at the blue zones around the world, which are the zones that typically people are living past 100 years of age, so they have incredible longevity, these places crop up at very strange spots at times. There's a community in China, for example, that's in one of the most toxic manufacturing and mining locations in the world, and yet they're all living past 100 years. And so there's been this long curiosity about how is it that these communities suddenly express longevity so consistently. And it was in one of these communities in Ikaria, Greece, that I learned this deep lesson. This couple from Ikaria came over to the U.S. and prepared a 5-course meal that they foraged in backyards for all the ingredients to make this traditional Greek meal. And there was so much love baked into this thing. It was just unbelievable. We literally, those 17 of us that ate this meal together, cried with every single course that came out as this woman in her 60s, and the two of them, husband and wife, were living on his family land that goes back 550 years in the family. It's an 8 or 10 generation history on this one vineyard in Ikaria, Greece. And so it's just an amazing story. They had brought with them their olive oil from their olives that had been pressed in their family press for hundreds of years. And so it's just like you're being reconnected to a human expression and a human relationship to food that we just don't have in the West. And so in that, I gave this rousing toast. I was crying because it was such a beautiful toast myself. I just was like this beautiful toast about microbiome and the things. And I was so pleased with myself and just giving them love at the end of this. Like, I'm so glad I had all this scientific information to tell you why you're living past 100 years. And this guy stands up, the husband stands up and says, well, doctor, that was all very interesting, but you're completely wrong. That is not why we live past 100 years in Ikaria, Greece. The reason we live past 100 years is because we always set an extra table at the chair hoping somebody we've never met sits with us for dinner. And that was just shattered my world. And it was this sudden realization of, I again was looking outside of myself as a human for the solution. I again believed that it was outside of there. And ultimately, the wound is in human relationship. The wound is not in the soils. The soils will recover. They'll do their thing. They'll create the new world. They'll birth new things we can't even dream of. But until we are eager enough and curious enough to set an empty chair hoping somebody we've never met sits with us, we won't actually solve the human condition. And so we need to fall in love with each other again, and we need to open up opportunities for that love to happen. And it cannot happen through your social media feed. And so we must start setting tables again. We must start eating together again. 1/3, 32% of meals in the United States are now consumed alone behind a steering wheel. And so the isolation that we have around food right now, I don't care how organic that meal is, if you're alone and eating it in traffic behind a steering wheel, you are not in right relationship with those nutrients. You are not going to find light energy within that food. It will hurt you more than it will help you, no matter how expensive that smoothie was. If you are not conscious of your connection to humanity when you are consuming food, it is not your solution. It is likely going to add to your suffering so that you have enough pain to push you forward until your vision can pull you forward. And so really we're in this situation where we must start setting tables again with empty chairs, hoping that we will meet new people and share a meal. And I think that that's an interesting possibility, that nature's already preparing for the new world. And she's doing that by providing a bountiful nutrition. What if we find out in a few years that there's a very high consciousness in carrots? We can now put EEGs on carrots and other plants and find out that they have complex neurologic systems that are interconnected, and they're thinking with the trees, and they're very fascinating that plants are actually probably more intelligent. They're just not equipped with vocal cords to tell us what they're thinking. But is it possible that the food that ends up on your plate is actually already planning for your healing, is actually already planning for the possibility that it's not seen as a source of vitamin A, but it's seen actually as the source and connection point for fellowship to occur? What if the plants around us are trying to set the table for us to start to eat together again and to create a new humanity? I think it won't be surprising if all of that consciousness comes out in the next few years. Continue to dive into soil implant intelligence, and there's some amazing books to read around that if you haven't, like The Hidden Life of Trees, The Understory, lots of great, incredible books out there to start to expose you to the extreme intelligence and community building desires and capacities within plants around us. And so I think it's possible that plants are redreaming us into our own connectivity. And perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than in what's been termed now plant medicine, which was historically just called ceremony. All indigenous peoples had ceremony that included plants that gave us a breakdown of the ego long enough so that we would experience connectivity. And so this fad that we now have in Los Angeles, where we're recording this, I'm told that there's over 500 ayahuasca ceremonies every weekend in Los Angeles now. Our communities are craving and striving to find the fix to this extreme isolation that we feel in ourselves. We know we have become cancers to ourselves, to our planets, to our species, and we need the reconnection to solve the cancer. And so the plants are literally saying, you are one, we are one. You are the plant, you are the tree, you are the sky, you are the stars, you are the cosmos, you are the divine. And people are experiencing that every weekend now, and it's making them redream their companies, and it's helping them rethink their value systems. I think we have a few more seismic leaps in that journey before we actually see what a healthy company or a healthy system will look like. But it's been a fun thing for my companies and my nonprofits to steep in, is what does a living system look like expressed in a company? How does a company switch from organization to organism? How does a society switch from, a concept of boundaries and countries to an organism of humanity? And so we're going to have to retrain ourselves out of the fear, guilt, and shame patterns and start to express that new connectivity. And the plants are there, and the animals there, the elephants are there. Everybody's waiting for us to rebirth here. So it's going to happen.
That's the most powerful thing that you've brought up thus far. And I just want to end on this note about creativity and art as a way through as well, because I think sharing a meal dissolves the ego and fosters connection. Plant medicine, of course, ceremony dissolves the ego and fosters connection. We know it even in the way in which it promotes the release of serotonin and dopamine, if you want to look on a neurotransmitter level, and how those neurotransmitters being flooded make it easier for us to connect and have shared experiences and emotion. But there's other tools that also dissolve the ego and promote connection. There's music. There's creating art together, painting with one another. And I think that perhaps it's not just the plants that will usher in the healing of humanity, but it is anything that is of God, whether that is the plants, the plant medicine, the music that lives within us, that's within our own voice, the instruments that nature and God and humans have created through our connection to God. And I was saying to you earlier that I find that creating art, especially around other people, changes my consciousness, maybe because I'm connecting to God when I'm making art, but it changes my consciousness in a similar way that plant medicine does. So, for example, when I take psilocybin mushrooms, I notice that I look around me and I see the beauty. I don't immediately judge. I don't immediately look at a tree in order to compare that tree to another tree or deduce if that tree is beautiful or see that tree in relation to myself or something else. I just see that tree. And I find that when I spend extended time in creative practice without an end goal, without a production goal, but just for the sake of creating and experiencing myself and life, I leave that session and I go walk on the street and I see a tree the same way. And I see another person the same way. And I've been trying personally to figure out what my next thing in life is to help people, because I think I've closed one chapter. I'm in the death before the rebirth. And maybe I will go into art in the way of connecting people through art as a way to quite literally heal the biome. Not just
Absolutely.
for art.
I've been told by a number of different indigenous communities around the world that the one thing that humanity has always done without harm to Mother Earth is our art, and I love that. I think it is wonderful that we have done something that hasn't caused hurt and pain and separation, and it's our music, it's our spoken word as much as it is the brush of the art on the wall of the cave or on a canvas or whatever it is. And so I strongly encourage all of us to lean into our art, because what I've gotten to find in my own journey is I went through a very exhausting period where I was kind of given a vision of everything I could do in my life to contribute to this new way of existence. This was 15 years ago. And I went through a very exhausting, nearly destroyed me 5 years of believing that was now my responsibility to go create that. And so I needed to learn how to start companies and I had this and blah, blah, and work myself into the freaking ground. And it damaged everything in my life, relationships and my own health. And it was just destructive. And I'm like, well, but I finally see my purpose. What's happening? And it wasn't until I started to allow listening to happen and let nature start to express itself through the vision rather than me trying to force the vision to happen. Let nature show me how the path was going to happen and let all that, take place. And that was a shift for the last kind of 7 years of letting it emerge rather than forcing it to occur. And then the deeper joy, I think, has come when I've started to realize, oh my gosh, all I'm called to is do art. And
It's all
starting
art.
this business as an art form and starting this team over here to do its thing as an art form. And now I get to wake up every morning with a sense of curiosity and creativity of just I wonder what we could do together today. I wonder what we could do with some more investment over here. And I wonder what would look like if we gave this team 3 times more resources to do their thing. And suddenly you're painting on canvases of the human society and on the overall human expression. So for all of you, I would invite you to start to think deeply about how does everything become my art form? How does my preparing breakfast become an art form again? Because it certainly was at one time. And it wasn't just pulled out of a wrapper. Start to express art in every area of your life, and every area of your life will become your medicine.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Thank you so much, Zach. This conversation has been art and has been deeply healing for me.
It's medicine.
And I hope to all of you listening, and I just thank you for your presence and your time today.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you for holding the conversation.
And for those listening, you can find all of the links that Zach mentioned, his products, his supplement line, all of the projects that you're working on and communities that you're building will be in the show notes, and you can connect with him there.
Thrilled to be with all of you. Excited to have you part of my world. Hope you sit down at the empty chair next to me.
I would love that. Thank you.